Well, hello again. And so this is module 4. So it's kind of a rundown of what's going to be happening. Do note that on March 12th, we will not have class because I hope you're going to be able to go to the RCA conference. So I took the week off, right? So to encourage you to go. Is anybody going?
Tentative right now. I've got audits coming up, got an
Mm.
audit window opening up, so I'm not sure at the moment.
Oh, I hope so. Anyway, should be fun in Colorado. Should be nice. Yeah. So not too far away for us. Unfortunately, I'm not going.
I went last year. This year I'm in Africa.
Yeah, oh, well, I'm sorry. You're going to Africa?
Yeah, heading to Cape Town
Oh, nice. For work or just for travel?
for work, part of the Global Culinary Council.
Oh, well, that sounds wonderful. I've never made it all the way there. It's like a really, really, really long ways away.
Yeah, quite a. It's not across the street, that's for sure.
No, it's like a long ways to Africa. And then once you get to Africa, it's a long ways again to Cape Town, right?
I'll fly from Houston to DC, DC straight into Cape Town.
Oh, that's better. Yeah. Well, good. All right. Well, good luck there. Today we're going to talk about the culinary product applications. I noticed that in the comment section, there were several of you that asked about nutrient retention. I'm not going to cover that today, but I promise I haven't forgotten it, right? So there are just a few clues that you can use without having to memorize every one of those. So I'm going to I'll talk about that later on. I don't exactly know when, right? But today I want to talk about marination and also gelled fruit products. So I'm going to focus on those two. So first of all, I thought I would start with a standard of identity. And I don't know how many of you have looked at that, but many of the food items that we prepare have a standard of identity. Things like that we have a lot of, jams, jellies, mustard, mayonnaise, um, just a lot of different things like that have a standard of identity. And so it's good if you're working on a product and you think that it might to check it out, to check out the standard of and look for the standard of identity. So standard of identities, hi Daniel and Andrew, good to see you guys today. So a standard of identity, there's over 250 different products that have a standard of identity. So thought since we're talking about gelled food products, that we should talk a little bit about where that is and what they are. So you can look them up. They're all in Title 21. All the food stuff is in the CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. So you can find them there, or now you can just Google Standard of Identity or SOI. So that this is the direct link to the Standard of Identity. So the Standard of Identity, they have 4 different categories of gelled fruits. There's jam, and that has crushed or chopped fruit in it. There's jelly, which we think of like apple jelly or grape jelly, is a firm gel made from juice, but there's no little chunks of fruit in there. Preserves have small whole fruit. So I kind of think of preserves as having bigger chunks of fruit than jam. And then fruit butters, which are kind of pulp. Usually apple butter is one that we can think of. So those are the four main categories. And the standard of identity will tell you what percentage of sugar, what ingredients are allowed, and what ingredients are not allowed. So you can look it up. So how much sugar, acid, pectin, whether or not you can put citric acid in and things like that. So that's what the standard. Have you guys ever looked up the standard of identity for any product you might make?
No, I haven't. Not myself.
Okay. So to make something, it might be just interesting to look up, even if you make like an aioli, right? And aioli probably won't fall under the standard of identity, but yet you'll see what the guidelines are, the federal guidelines, what kinds of things are approved. So today I want to talk about the jams, jellies, and preserves. And these are called osmotic preserves. Osmotic preserves. So later on, I'll talk about what osmosis is for those of you who, just as a refresher, but what that is. They're also classified as intermediate moisture foods with low water activity, and they have a low pH. So because they have a low pH and they have a low water activity below 0.85, they are considered acid and water controlled for safety. So these are shelf stable products. So we can keep them on the shelf because they have a low pH and a low water activity. So they do not need to be refrigerated versus these others over here that have a high pH and a high water activity. This would be refrigerated, let's say like a cook chill product, for instance. So this is down here in the very safe group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we use pectin to help trap the water and make it solid. So pectin is the glue that holds the cells together. So most fruit has pectin in it, but probably not enough for a stable gel. So, and if your fruit is immature, not ripe enough, you won't get a gel because the pectin is what's called protopectin. Protopectin does not gel. As the fruit ripens and it reaches its optimum level, we end up with pectin, right? And if the fruit is overripe, we get pectic acid, and the overripe fruit will not gel. So only ripe fruit will gel. So what is pectin? Well, pectin is a high molecular weight polysaccharide. So we've studied other polysaccharides. Can anybody think of one or two? Polysaccharides. Okay, amylose and amylopectin are polysaccharides, right? You knew that. Of course you do that, right? Remember that when we look at this word right here, saccharide, what does saccharide mean? What is a saccharide? Sugar. That's right, Ben. I'm
Yeah,
watching.
I was just gonna say sugar.
Good. All right. I'm watching the chat right here. So that's why I saw that. Ben got there first. Right. So saccharide is a sugar. So poly is many, many sugars hooked together, hundreds of sugars hooked together. If we're talking about starch, amylose and amylopectin, that sugar is glucose, right? But in this case, in the case of pectin, galactose, or what we say is galacturonic acid units. Galactose is the sugar. So if we remember back from when we studied sugar, the three monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose, right? Glucose, fructose, and galactose are the three monosaccharides. So this one is a long chain of galactose molecules hooked together. So the nice thing about the pectin molecules are that they tend, once you get them dissolved, they tend to stay in solution. Unlike the glucose, right, the amylose and amylopectin that fall out, the pectin stays in solution. So because the molecules, because of the positive and negative charges, repel each other. So it tends to stay in solution. So that's really nice. There are two types of pectin. The most common type, the kind we use for normal sugars, is high methyl oxypectin. A methyl unit is a CH3, right? So high methyl oxypectin. It requires acid and sugar in order to gel. So it requires a pH of 3.5 or less, which is why we add lemon juice, citric acid when we're making our jams and jellies, and it requires sugar. And what the sugar does is it decreases pectin's polymer water interactions by binding the water. And so you get this the firm gel. And that's the normal kind of pectin. And people are always saying, well, I made this jam without adding pectin, that evil additive, right? But pectin is normal. It's just not usually high enough to get a firm gel. So if you don't add any pectin and your fruit is not perfectly ripe, you're likely to get a syrup and not a jam. In order to make low sugar jam, we use low methyl oxypectin. So in other words, less than 50% of the molecules are methylated. And this requires the presence of calcium ions to form a gel. So we have to add a source of calcium. Do you guys make jam?
Never have.
Mm? Well, I used to, when I was young, I made jam a couple times and I realized that it didn't taste any different than what you bought in the supermarket. And it was a lot of work and it was expensive because I don't have a farm. So therefore I had to buy the strawberries to make the jam. I'm going, it's still jam, just tastes the same. But it's fun to make, fun to make, especially if you make one that has an interesting flavor to it, like if you put jalapenos or something in there. So this is just a chart that I put in here that kind of shows the relationship of the different the sugars. This is sugar, sucrose, glucose, and galactose, citric acid, or we could put tartaric acid in the case of grape juice. Any questions about making jam? So the use of pectin is grass. In other words, it's generally recognized as safe. So if you wanted to add it to something different, you could, and it would be considered safe. So it is, uh, good for, lots of things. If you wanted to thicken something and you didn't want to add starch to it and you wanted to look at pectin, Pectin, of course, makes a clear gel, so that's kind of nice. Some things about pectin, it must be completely dissolved to ensure full utilization and a heterogeneous gel formation. Otherwise, you get lumps. So the best way to do that is to pre-blend your pectin with some sugar and dissolve it in hot water. So an osmotic preserve, what is that? Osmotic. Why is it called an osmotic preserve? Does anybody have any ideas about why that is? Ben says the sugar is eating up the water. Okay, using up. Okay, let's talk a little bit about osmosis, right? Osmosis. So osmosis, the process of osmosis is the movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane to equalize the amount of solute or sugar or salt on each side of the membrane. So let's say I have a piece of fruit. Let's say this beaker is a piece of fruit. And on the inside of the fruit, right, is high concentration of sugar. On the outside of the fruit, it's the water and it's low concentration of sugar. So what's going to happen is the sugar's too big to go through the semi-permeable membrane, but the water is going to transfer in. And you'll notice that the dots of the solute are the same on both sides. So it will pass through a semi-permeable membrane. Other places where we see osmosis is if you have a reverse osmosis water system, right? A reverse osmosis water system to remove any minerals from your water. Can you think of other places? So this is jam. Other places where we see osmosis. Oh, I know. Um, when we think about bacteria, right? Uh, if we have a high sugar content or a high salt content, it draws the water out of the microorganism and kills the microorganism because the water moves into the higher concentration. Any questions? So what we're seeing with this jam is that the inside the fruit is going to be a high concentration of sugar, on the outside is going to be low. So what it's going to do is the water is going to go into the fruit pieces and it's going to cause the cells to break apart. And that's why it's called an osmotic preserve. So the important things to remember about osmosis is one, this is a semi-permeable membrane. So it means only the little things go through, not the big things, right? And in this case, it's the water that's moving, not the sugar. Questions? Very quiet out there in student land. It's this face has made you quiet, right? You're going, who's that crazy lady?
I admittedly caught pneumonia on Monday in Chicago, and I'm recovering here. I flew home a little early, wasn't going to be able to make this class, so I'm um I'm just now being able to talk. I was short of breath until
Oh,
uh,
wow.
this morning, so I'm a little out of sorts, to be
You're
honest with you.
really, yeah, you're running a little slow, huh,
Yeah,
Dale?
I got like the little boogies from my kids last week, and then I guess the combination of that just kind of still hanging out there, and
Yeah.
then getting out to the cold and going hot cold, I guess just it
Oh,
caught me pretty quick, but I was able to catch it fast and put it.
oh, good,
So
good. Well, I'm glad you.
anyhow, yeah, not to make this about me, but that's why I'm quiet for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other things? And for some reason now I have not all day had a tickle in my throat, but I have one now, so it won't go away. Okay, let's talk a little bit about marination. This is something you probably are a lot more familiar with, right? I'm sure you marinate meat all the time, right? Or marinate whatever, right? If we are talking about meat, fish, or poultry, we talk about marination. If we're talking about the marination of fruits and vegetables, it's called maceration, right? So those probably two terms you should be familiar with. But why we marinate? The main reason is to increase water holding capacity. So why do we want to do that? Why would we want to increase the water holding capacity? Increase the water inside the meat.
Because water's cheap and it increases the profit of your core item.
That's true. That is true. But there might be a couple of other more culinary reasons for that.
Well, if you're not being dishonest, we marinate to add flavor, tenderness, other key attributes that make something more palatable or desirable.
Right.
But in the commercial world, we only do it to increase our profits.
Right. But it does make the meat more tender, right? The higher water content is a little more tender, right? So, and it does obviously increase the weight, and water's cheap, right? So it enhances tenderness, flavor. It says increase product shelf life by controlling pathogens. Okay. We say, oh, okay. We say, you can also use this as an excuse. It'll control pathogens, especially listeria. I read that somewhere. So the ingredients that we would use in a marinade, one of the first one is salt, right? Sodium chloride. So we know that salt, let's go back to food science. When we put it in solution, we have salt, sodium, and it has a positive ion, and then it disassociates. And so we have chlorine, and it has a negative ion, a negative charge. In other words, this electron stays with the chlorine. Just a little quiz. Do you remember why the electron likes to stay with the chlorine and doesn't stay with the sodium? To make chlorine negative? I know food science was a long time ago. Because chlorine is bigger. It's a big bully. It's a bigger molecule, right? So it has more attractive, it can attract better. So that's why. So in solution, we have some positives and some negatives. Water, if we remember water, right? Water is H2O, right? And oxygen is a really big bully. So oxygen keeps the extra electrons, which are negative, and it makes it positives where the hydrogens are. So therefore, it attracts these sodium and chlorine molecules and keeps them in solution. So that's why the salt keeps the water that's why adding salt to a marinade will increase the water holding capacity. Does that make sense? Hmm.
It
Okay.
does.
Good. All right. So that's why it enhances it. And also it can some other things here. It hydrates and solubilizes the salt soluble proteins. It enhances the water activity and the stickiness of the meat. Denatures and coagulates the proteins, because so remember when we talked about protein, we said that salt will denature the protein, which means changes its shape. So changes the shape a little bit. So in the learning objective, they use these two, adsorb and absorb. They're pretty much the same. They mean pretty much the same thing, right? But one is direct molecular interaction and physical incorporation. But I think they use it by mistake in the learning objectives. So that's one of the things we can add, one of the most common things. But unfortunately, the goal of the dietary guidelines is to reduce salt. So what else can we use? So we can add enzymes, and these are called proteases, right? Proteases. So proteases is a overarching term that includes all of the enzymes that work on protein, right? So protease, we know that enzymes always end in ASE. We also know that enzymes are proteins. So the examples that they give here and the ones that we use are bromelain, physin, and so a few bacterial enzymes. So this is the reason that we can't add fresh pineapple to gelatin, right? To jello. If you wanted to add pineapple and make an old school jello, you're going to have to you're either going to have to cook the pineapple or use canned pineapple, which is going to destroy the enzyme. So, but there's the enzyme in pineapple. And then there's papain, right? So my favorite story about this is one day I was having a facial and I asked the girl, "What are you putting on my face?" And she says, "An exotic tropical enzyme." And I said, "You're putting meat tenderizer on my face?" Right? Which of course she was, because it contained this exotic enzyme, papain, right? Which is fine, which is good for, digesting any dead cells on the outside of my face. But she wasn't expecting that answer, I think. So anyway, so that's how enzymes work. So the enzymes are going to go in there and they're going to take, if we have these long amino acid chains, they're actually going to break the chain apart and add some water to it. And so that they're going to, soften it. So if you use an enzyme, like Adolph's meat tenderizer on your meat, do you know that it doesn't go very far into the meat? It just makes the outside mushy, right? Isn't really absorbed into the meat unless you like inject it or something. And enzymes keep working. So if you wanted to stop softening, you have to cook it. Another thing we can add to marinades is phosphates. And of course, we do that a lot. And this, we're talking about alkaline phosphates. So what does alkaline mean? So you know what an acid is. So what's the opposite of an alkaline? A base, right? A pH higher than 7, right? That's right. So we look at the continuum. 7 is neutral. These things are alkaline or bases, which means they have a lot of hydroxide ions versus the acids down here, which have a lot of hydrogen ions. That's a difference, excuse me, between an acid and a base. So looking at meat, fresh meat has a pH of about 7 or 7.2 when the meat is slaughtered. It has a pH of 7 to 7.2. But it goes through the process of rigor mortis. So, in other words, just because the animal dies doesn't mean metabolism stops, but actually, metabolism keeps going until it's used up all of the glycogen that's inside the muscle. And because there's incomplete metabolism, produces lactic acid, and it lowers the pH of the meat to about 5.4 or 5.7 within 18 to 24 hours. Right? Same thing happens when you exercise, right? If you do high intensity exercise and you don't have enough oxygen in there to metabolize, you use up your glycogen and it produces lactic acid. And when the next day when your muscle hurts, that's because it's been acidified a little bit, right? So, and then you just have to wait for your blood circulation to clear it. Also, you tore a bunch of muscles, tiny little muscles, and making it bigger. But what's the problem with this is that the isoelectric point, which is also called the PL, is where the water holding capacity is the lowest. So the water holding capacity is the lowest at this 5.4 to 5.7 pH. So we either have to make it, in order to get more water, we either have to make it more acidic, or we can add a phosphate and we can make it more it is acidic. So if we add a base, we can move up the pH a little bit and increase the water holding capacity. So the isoelectric point is where the is where the protein has no electrical charge. In other words, the pluses and minuses are exactly the same. And so if the pluses and minuses are exactly the same, then you have the lowest amount of water holding capacity. But if you have more minuses or more positives than the other, they repel each other, because there's no charge, they don't repel each other. So if you want to give them a charge, then they will repel each other because more negatives like charges repel. And that causes the unfolding of the muscle protein and increases the water holding capacity. Would you like me to run through that again? No? Cool. So you guys do some marination, yeah? Mhm.
Yes.
And you use phosphates, yes?
Well, personally, no. Company I work for right now, yes. Back in my restaurant days, never.
Mhm.
So it's something that's new to me.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, phosphates are, and obviously what happens when you use too much? Okay, Ben says they use them all the time, right? Yeah, it gets a soapy feeling. So it's like if you accidentally added too much baking powder, baking soda when you made muffins, right? It gives it that bitter metallic baking soda, soapy feel and a bitter taste. So the brining, we use a 3% salt solution. Disrupts them. And if you go up to 5.5, you can dissolve the filaments. All right. So then I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is the percentage calculation formula, right? Part divided by the whole times 100 gives you the percentage of increase of water volume. I don't have to go over that. You know that. So yeah, so if you weigh it before and then you weigh it after, right? So then you divide the whole with the water into the part without the water times 100. So moving on to something easier, right? Reduced oxygen packaging. So this is the classification, the federal classification is reduced oxygen packaging. So it includes a lot of different technologies. Cook, chill, sous vide, high pressure processing. All of these things have one thing in common. They have a reduced oxygen. And O2 is the bad guy, right? So O2 reacts with fats and makes them rancid and, it's just a bad guy all the way around. So reducing the amount of oxygen in a package is going to be great. So ways we can do that, we can do the old time cryovac. We can use modified atmosphere packaging. So in that particular case, we would add an inert gas, and generally the inert gas is nitrogen. Right. The air around us is like 70%. My girlfriend told me yesterday, like 72% nitrogen. So if you flush out the oxygen and put nitrogen in there, then the bacteria can't grow because there isn't any oxygen and there's no the fats don't become rancid. So we can do that. So that's why we flush. And that's what they do with like salads and things like that, the packaged salad mixes and stuff that we see in the supermarket. We can do cook chill, where we cook it outside. We do cook a big batch, then we fill up the bag, and generally we leave a little bit of an air pocket at the top, so it'll cool a little better. And then we seal it up and it keeps any additional oxygen from coming in. We can do sous vide. So sous vide is where you vacuum pack first and then cook in a water bath. If you do cook, chill, or sous vide in a restaurant, you must have a HACCP plan. So I know in a facility, we always have a HACCP plan, but in a restaurant, they must have. This is used for potentially hazardous foods with a high moisture content, high water activity above 0.85, and a pH of 4.6 or higher. Those refrigerated foods that I talked about. So these are the heating and cooling times. You know these. Anything you want me to cover about this stuff? I just think that the terminology is difficult. I think you know what all these things are. So they're all classified according to the food code as a reduced oxygen packaging. Which includes modified oxygen packaging and all the rest of these. Questions? No. See, this is,
Said not at the moment.
all right. Well, this is what it was. So let's look at the quiz. I think this quiz was a little more challenging. Flushing with inert gas, nitrogen, reduces blank and the destruction of fat-soluble vitamin. Right. Oxygen.
Now, Jill, you mentioned last week that everyone has a different quiz, correct?
Yes, there are 20 questions, and each time you take it, you'll get there are more than 20 questions, and each time you get it, you could get potentially different questions.
Understood.
So if you take it again, because you didn't get this one, right?
I don't think that one was on mine.
Yeah. So if you take it again, you get different questions, right? When you take it again.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what Ben says. So so yeah, there are 20 questions, but there's more than 20 in the test bank. So I brought this one up because this is fat soluble vitamins, and this is really addressing nutrient retention. So we know that fat soluble vitamins, we know that polyunsaturated fats like vegetable oils, that we have to control the amount of oxygen, right? Otherwise, it'll turn rancid. Well, that same oxygen will affect the fat soluble vitamins, which are also unsaturated. So you could know the answer to this question without knowing the answer, right? You could deduce this, hopefully, if we apply the same principle. So I'm not sure this was that I gave you enough information for this one, but I was looking for maceration. So when fruits and vegetables are preserved in a liquid, I guess if I'd said marinated in a liquid, you might
That
have,
would have been better, yes.
yes. You're going, what the hell is she talking about? So maceration we know is fruits and vegetables, and marination is meat. Maybe I'll go back and fix it. Shrinking and yield loss from cooking are experienced in which of the following? Cook chill, because we cook in an open container. So we get, when it boils, we lose water, right? Sous vide, we package it and then cook it. So the yield loss is less, isn't. I guess unless you think about were you thinking about after it's cooked and there's a little water in the package along with the cooked meat?
No, that was me. I read it incorrectly. I was thinking there would not be loss. So yeah,
Oh, oh, it was a case of reading too fast.
correct.
Okay. Which of the following considered an intentional loss of nutrients? Peeling, trimming, and coring. So every time we discard something, whether it's a peel or a seed or, well, not seed, but, trimming or whatever, we're losing the nutrients that are in that. So that is intentional loss of nutrients. If the vitamin is destroyed by cooking, or if it is leached out, if a water-soluble vitamin is leached out during washing and blanching, that is not intentional, right? And obviously, oxidation is the destruction of the nutrients by enzymes or oxygen. We don't want that to happen. So if you think about, if you divide the vitamins into two sections, there's the fat-soluble vitamins and the water-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins are destroyed by all the same things that destroy vegetable oil, or the fat-soluble vitamins. I mean, all the vegetable oils. So oxidation is one, right? The primary one. But heating it, we can heat oil and it doesn't really affect the vitamin content, so heating and those things don't really matter. The other group, the water-soluble vitamins, they're water soluble. So anything like washing and blanching, anything where we cook in water and the vitamin is leached out, that's the loss for those. So you can think about the two groups, as two individual groups that work differently. Obviously, the fat soluble vitamins are going to stick to the fat molecules and they're not going to be lost in washing, but the other ones will. And heat will destroy the water-soluble vitamins faster than the fat-soluble vitamins. So rather than thinking about each vitamin individually, think about them as by their major groups when we think about loss. If that makes any sense. And this one, you just have to know this one. So riboflavin is what gives milk that pretty non-fat milk, that slightly blue color, because riboflavin itself is slightly blue, and it is sensitive to light. And so we now put milk in containers that block the light, so that because it'll be destroyed by light. Riboflavin is about the only one. Light will affect the colors of like the carotenoids, but riboflavin is the one that's sensitive to light. So exposing milk. So in the old days when I remember in the old days, the milkman come and left it on the step, right? So in glass bottles, but that, of course, is long gone. So that's the major one. I shouldn't talk about that. So it makes me look old. The bioavailability. Bioavailability means after you've eaten it, right, and digested it, then those amino acids can be absorbed. But, but if you cook an egg, and you make it all crinkly on the outside, like you cook it too hot and it gets brown and it gets overcooked on the outside, it gets all crinkly, that the protein that's in that we cannot absorb. It is destroyed, right? So the bioavailability of that. And the same thing goes by reduced by non-enzymatic browning, which is another name for this is the science name for what thing that we do all the time. That's right, Maillard reaction. which is different than enzymatic browning, which is what happens in an apple. Oh, look at that. See, that's the answer, which is another name for the Maillard reaction. I think it is an oxidation reduction reaction, but that's not what I was looking for. Fat vitamins A, D, and E, because they're fat soluble, they're destroyed by oxidation. They become rancid. Think about it that way. They become rancid. And this one, I think you didn't read it. Cooked in a temperature-controlled water bath. So this one here you got right. So thiamine is an acid. So vitamins, almost all the vitamins are acid. In fact, I think they all are acids. So alkaline is always going to destroy them. Can't spell. There's a typo. Low pH makes it more acidic. Oxygen, no, this one. All right. Anybody, any questions? So next week, I be normal again. Enjoy this while you can.
I love it. What a shame. Yeah, should be dress code, Jill. Should be dress code.
No, this is way too much work.